It was December 1941, and the air over the Eastern Front was sharper than any blade. The German army, which had stormed across Europe with what seemed like unstoppable force, found itself frozen in the middle of a vast, white nightmare. Snow had fallen relentlessly, temperatures had plummeted far below freezing, and even the most well-oiled machines began to fail. Engines refused to start, rifles jammed, and soldiers shivered in their uniforms, ill-prepared for the brutality of the Russian winter. You could see determination in their eyes, but it was a determination matched by despair. Right from the first hour, it was clear to both the Germans and their opponents that this December would be a turning point. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to History Plus for more incredible stories from the past that shaped the world. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. For weeks, the German advance had pushed relentlessly toward Moscow, confident in their ability to crush the Soviet defenses. The speed, the precision, and the sheer organization of the Wehrmacht had been unmatched. But as the first snow settled on the muddy roads, everything began to change. Supply lines stretched thin, fuel ran dangerously low, and the cold gnawed at men who had marched hundreds of kilometers without proper winter gear. History Plus takes you now into the heart of this frozen battlefield, to understand how nature, strategy, and sheer human endurance combined to halt one of the most powerful armies the world had ever seen. By the time the Soviets regrouped, the Germans were already facing a nightmare far bigger than any army could plan for, a winter that refused to yield. In towns and villages near Moscow, civilians watched as columns of German tanks and trucks struggled through snowdrifts taller than men. The cold was merciless, turning mud into ice and rivers into slippery, treacherous sheets. Soldiers tried to keep morale high, telling stories and singing songs, but it was becoming painfully obvious that the situation was spiraling out of control. On the Soviet side, commanders recognized an opportunity. They could see that exhaustion, frostbite, and freezing equipment were breaking the invaders even without a fight. In this story, History Plus will take you step by step into the events of December 1941, revealing why this winter didn't just stop Germany, it changed the very course of the war itself. As the days went by, the German soldiers began to realize that this winter was not just cold, it was deadly. Boots froze to the snow, rations became scarce, and frostbite claimed limbs faster than any bullet could. Engines that had carried the Wehrmacht across Europe now refused to roar and supply. Trucks slid helplessly into snowdrifts. Commanders frantically tried to maintain control, sending orders that could no longer be executed on frozen roads. Every kilometer forward became a battle against ice and exhaustion. History Plus shows us that while the German army had planned for a swift victory, nature had its own plan, and it was merciless. On the Soviet side, commanders seized the opportunity with precision. They understood that their enemy was vulnerable, not just because of numbers, but because of the winter itself. Small units harassed supply lines, ambushed isolated vehicles, and used the dense forests and frozen rivers to their advantage. Every failed German maneuver was an opening for the Soviets to strike. Yet even amid the chaos, German soldiers fought with discipline, forming tight columns and trying to hold positions that were slowly being swallowed by snow. This deadly dance between man, machine, and winter is something only History Plus can bring to life with all its terrifying detail. Civilians in the towns near Moscow had little idea of the scale of suffering. Frozen villages bore witness to endless columns of soldiers struggling through drifts taller than themselves. The cold, blinding wind seemed to mock their every step, while commanders argued over strategies that were becoming increasingly meaningless. Letters home told stories of unimaginable hardship, of comrades lost to frost, and of tanks and artillery immobilized in icy trenches. History Plus reminds us that this was not just a battle of weapons. It was a war against the elements, and the German army was slowly losing. By mid-December, the full weight of the winter offensive hit home. Commanders who had once believed in rapid victory realized they were fighting a different enemy now. One that could not be negotiated with or defeated by conventional tactics. Every frozen river crossing, every blocked road, and every stalled tank added to the growing sense of despair. Even for the strongest units, morale began to crumble and whispers of retreat began circulating. History Plus takes you through this critical period, showing how the Soviets exploited every weakness and how winter itself became a weapon far more powerful than any cannon. By late December, it became painfully clear that the German advance had stalled completely. Snow had buried entire roads, frozen rivers had become impossible barriers, and frostbite had claimed thousands of soldiers. The Wehrmacht, once seen as invincible, was now trapped by a combination of nature and Soviet resilience. Every attempt to push forward ended in failure, and even experienced commanders were struggling to maintain order. History Plus takes you right into these freezing battlefields, showing how desperation grew with every day. Soviet troops, warmed by determination and an intimate knowledge of the land, launched counterattacks at exactly the right moments. Small units struck German flanks, ambushed supply convoys, and forced entire divisions to stop in their tracks. The winter, harsh and unrelenting, was the perfect ally. Tanks bogged down in ice, artillery froze, and soldiers huddled for warmth instead of advancing. This was the moment when German confidence, built over years of rapid victories, began to crack. History Plus emphasizes that victory was no longer just about strategy. It was about endurance, adaptation, and survival. In the towns surrounding Moscow, stories of frozen columns of soldiers circulated quickly. Civilians saw the chaos unfold and understood that something monumental had shifted. Letters from soldiers described a landscape where every step forward was a gamble, where frostbitten hands held rifles uselessly, and where hope was measured in inches of progress. Yet despite these hardships, the fighting spirit did not vanish entirely. German soldiers continued to fight not for glory, but to survive the wrath of winter. History Plus guides us through these human stories, making clear that the battlefield was as much about courage as it was about tactics. The turning point was not a single battle, but a combination of relentless cold, stretched supply lines and Soviet precision. Every stalled vehicle, every abandoned post, every failed attack contributed to the growing sense that the German offensive had lost its momentum. By the end of December, the Wehrmacht was no longer a dominant force. It was a trapped army fighting against both a determined opponent and the brutal winter itself. History Plus explains how this pivotal moment shifted the balance on the Eastern Front, setting the stage for the Soviets to regain control and begin a long, grueling pushback against the invaders. As December 1941 drew to a close, it became painfully clear that Germany had lost its grip on the Eastern Front. The rapid advance that had once seemed unstoppable had ground to a halt, frozen by snow, ice, and the relentless resistance of the Soviet forces. Soldiers who had marched thousands of kilometers found themselves exhausted, ill-equipped, and facing an enemy that refused to surrender. History Plus shows us that this was more than just a failed offensive. It was a pivotal moment that shifted the balance of the war itself. The impact of this winter campaign went far beyond the battlefield. German commanders had underestimated the power of nature and the resilience of the Soviet army, and their logistical failures became a textbook example of overreach. Supply lines were stretched to breaking points, tanks and artillery were immobilized, and morale sank to levels unseen since the start of the war. Every unit that had once carried the pride of the Wehrmacht now struggled to survive the harsh conditions. History Plus highlights that this was a humbling lesson. Even the most powerful armies can be brought to their knees by the right combination of strategy, terrain, and weather. For the Soviets, December 1941 was a moment of triumph and hope. They had stopped the German juggernaut not with superior numbers alone, but through careful planning, intimate knowledge of the land, and the clever use of winter itself as a weapon. Villages and forests became defensive strongholds, ambush points, and supply traps. Soldiers learned to move quickly, strike decisively, and adapt to the freezing conditions that had crippled their enemy. History Plus emphasizes that the resilience and determination of these troops laid the foundation for the Soviet counteroffensive that would eventually push Germany back and change the course of the war. As we reflect on December 1941, it's clear that the winter was not just a season, it was a decisive factor that shaped history. The German army, once thought invincible, had been humbled by conditions it could neither control nor anticipate. And for the millions who witnessed it, this winter marked the beginning of a shift in momentum, the moment when the war started turning in favor of the Allies. History Plus brings this story to life, showing that sometimes the greatest victories are won not by firepower alone, but by endurance, strategy, and the unyielding forces of nature. Before you go, don't forget to comment below what surprised you the most about this historic winter and share this video with friends who love history. Your engagement helps History Plus bring even more amazing stories from the past to life.